Friends, I would never tell you who to vote for. I wouldn't. First, because it's not legal. The deal is that the government doesn't interfere with religious institutions, and in return, religious institutions don't tell their congregants who to vote for. But more importantly, it would be pointless for me to tell you who to vote for because you all already know who you're going to vote for. So I'm not going to waste my time and yours. Who will win this election is anyone's guess. But regardless of who you vote for, we have a tendency to think that our Jewish civic responsibility culminates with casting that vote. But we are mistaken. God forbid that any of us should think we have done our duty when we submit our ballot, that Israel is safe, that democracy is safe, that we are safe. No, on the contrary. My message to all of you today is this: our Jewish civic responsibility only begins when we cast that vote. Some would have us believe that in this election there is a Jewish choice and a not the Jewish choice. I don't believe that. There is no single Jewish way to vote. Many of us vote as an expression, in fact, of our Jewish values. And I love that. The values that we believe Judaism calls us to live in the public sphere. Some of us will prioritize Ahavat Yisrael, love of one's fellow Jew and of the state of Israel, and thus will be motivated to cast our vote for the candidate who we believe will be more supportive of Israel. Some of us will prioritize Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving one's neighbor as oneself, or Shmirat ha'adamah, taking care of our planet, or ensuring a woman's right to determine the fate of her own body, or other values that we hold dear. There are Jewish values on both sides. So whether you're planning to vote Republican or Democrat, my hope today is to prompt us to think about the work that each of us needs to do after the election. Because, to paraphrase Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, it doesn't matter what party you're voting for as long as you're embarrassed by it. If you are planning to vote for Kamala Harris, you have responsibilities beyond November 5th. Your first responsibility is to ensure that the Democratic Party remains pro-Israel. Now, those of you who are voting Republican already think that that statement in itself is an oxymoron. And there are many times, have been many times in recent years, when I myself have been disturbed by the Democratic Party's unwillingness to stand up for Israel. And I'm talking about the senior leadership, the backbone of the party. Half the Democrats in Congress didn't attend Bibi's speech there in July. And I'm not just talking about young progressives or AOC. That's why every single time I'm with our I'm with the three individuals who represent us on the federal level, Representative Himes, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Murphy. I make a point of speaking with them about their support for Israel. The last thing I want is for Jews to have to choose between supporting Israel and voting Democratic. Second, it is incumbent upon you to hold Kamala Harris to the commitments she made on the convention stage and the debate stage. On both of those evenings, Harris made strong statements about Israel's right to defend itself, about ensuring military aid and support to Israel, about Israel's security, and about not hesitating to take action against Iran if necessary. But I've said many times from this bima, words are cheap, actions matter. So if you're voting for her, you have a Jewish responsibility to hold her to those statements, because no one else will. It is essential that the United States maintains the closest of ties with Israel, not only providing essential military aid, but by supporting Israel in the community of nations as its advocate at the UN, in Europe, and in the eyes of the world. Whoever wins this election, it is our responsibility to make sure that this relationship continues and is strong. It's essential for Israel, and it's essential for the U.S. in an era when Israel is the front line against terror, extremism, and chaos. And Vice President Harris also made important statements about the Palestinian right to dignity, security, and self-determination. Such statements are not only acceptable, they are part and parcel of our Jewish moral tradition. And they are essential to the future of the state of Israel as well. We know that Israel and the Palestinian people are inexorably intertwined. Neither of us is going anywhere. And the future, any future in the region, must somehow point the way to a Palestinian entity that lives peaceably and securely side by side with Israel. And finally, if you're going to vote for Vice President Harris, you have the responsibility to make sure that Jews are welcome in progressive spaces. American liberalism, embodied by the New Deal and the Civil Rights Movement, the right to choose, the movement for marriage equality and LGBTQ rights, has been the place that most American Jews have called their political home since the beginning of the 20th century. The worlds of art, music, publishing, social activism, not to mention academia, overwhelmingly vote Democratic. And these are also the exact spaces where we Jews are today dangerously close to being unwelcome. No one should ask us to check our identity or our love of Israel at the door, or God forbid, compel us to denounce Israel in order to fit in. And we boldly reject the label of oppressor that is placed upon us in many of those circles. It will take years to reverse the now pervasive anti-Semitic worldview of the progressive left, but we have to start. And thus, for anyone voting Democratic, it is high time to insist that the exclusion of Jews from progressive spaces ends immediately. We have to make clear that we support diversity and that we insist on claiming a seat at that very table. And now I want to speak to those of you who are planning to vote for former President Donald Trump. Maybe you're voting this way because there's a perception that the Republican Party and its candidates are more supportive of Israel. And I say perception because I'm not entirely sure it's accurate. You too have responsibilities beyond November 5th. First, oppose isolationism. Isolationism is the idea that America shouldn't get involved in international affairs, and it has a deep history in American political thought. Isolationism has always been proven wrong, yet it is once again gaining strength within the Republican Party. The party has been deeply divided over aid to Ukraine, which we all know is the front line of democracy today. J.D. Vance voted against aid to Ukraine and Israel just this past April. And Trump has repeatedly refused to support Ukraine, and as we have heard many times, has actually favored Putin. So the question is this: given their recent statements and votes and the isolationist trends within the party, do you think Trump and Vance love Jews so much that they will rush to Israel's aid? Are these the men who we will trust to have Israel's back? Second, if you're planning on voting for Donald Trump, you also have the responsibility to fight the anti-Semitic tropes of the far right. Both parties have dangerous fringes which produce anti-Semitic rhetoric that we may no longer overlook or minimize or excuse. We cannot say, oh, it's just a few wackos, no one really listens to them, the press makes them out to be more than they are. The far right has proudly embraced populism and nativism, which invariably produces anti-Semitism, as Bret Stephens wrote. So if you're voting for former President Trump, do not look past the trafficking in historic anti-Semitic tropes, the scapegoating of Jews for potential misfortune, as Trump recently did when he preemptively blamed us for not getting elected. And beyond conspiracy theories or implications of dual loyalty, we know that Trump has empowered and strengthened our enemies using coded language, dog whistles, if you will, to signal his support to some of the worst anti-Semites in the nation. Plenty of us here today will choose to look beyond all of this and cast a vote for Trump. You can do that. But then it is your Jewish responsibility to draw a clear line for Trump and the party. Make it clear that it is unacceptable to support Israel in one moment and then turn around and spout anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracies in the next. You know, in community organizing, we have a formula that we live by. It goes like this: power equals organized people plus organized money. Well, over the summer, we Jews used power, organized people, and organized money to oust Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush from Congress. Isn't it time we used our power to oust Marjorie Taylor Greene and others like her as well? They may vote in favor of Israel, but they are surely bad for the Jews. And that is a deal we should no longer be willing to make. And finally, and this may be my most important point, there cannot be just one party that is pro-Israel. So this is a counterintuitive responsibility. Many of us who are going to vote Republican are going to do so because of the perception, as I mentioned, that the Republican Party is the only party that strongly supports Israel. In fact, I hear from some of you who think that the Democratic Party is hopelessly anti-Zionist, tragically drunk on DEI, and intent on dismantling the colonialist Jewish state. As a result, you're tempted to write off the Democratic Party completely. Well, you should do the exact opposite. I say this as a careful student of Jewish history, which we all should be these days. Throughout our long history of exile, we Jews survived only by currying favor with a particular monarch. And that worked for us as long as that monarch stayed in power. When there was a regime change or another ruler came to the throne or an empire fell, what would happen to us? All of a sudden, we had to go and find another place to live. If you go back to the early days of our nation, to when President George Washington visited Newport, Rhode Island in August 1790, you'll find an address written by Moses Seixas, the head of the Jewish community there, which was then the largest and most prosperous in the fledgling United States. Seixas greeted Washington like a monarch. He said, "Permit the children of the stock of Abraham to approach you with the most cordial affection and esteem for your person and merits, and to join with our fellow citizens in welcoming you to Newport. With pleasure, we pray that the God of Israel, who delivered David from the peril of the sword, that the same Spirit will ever rest upon you, enabling you to discharge the arduous duties of chief magistrate of these states." It is a fawning address, born out of generations of obsequiousness to those in power, and a recognition that at the time, America only had one political party. There was no organized opposition. For all anyone knew, as went George Washington, so went the Jews. Today, we know that political power is fleeting. One party may hold Congress or the White House for a few years, but sooner or later the pendulum will swing the other direction, and the other party will inevitably be in power. Thus, it would be foolish to tie Israel's security and our own well-being to just one party. It would be a disaster to have only one American political party that supports Israel. So if you're going to vote Republican, rather than turning your back on the Democrats, you should be doing everything you can to ensure that both parties are pro-Israel. Friends, this year, Connecticut is offering early voting for the first time. So we can each cast our ballots as early as October 21st. in just 9 days. And it is a modern Jewish mitzvah to vote. But our responsibility as Jewish citizens of the United States is not complete when we cast that ballot. Whether your candidate wins or loses, our work as Jews has only begun. Our work to ensure that both parties are pro-Israel. Our work to banish anti-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Israel positions from the extremes of both parties. Our work to claim a seat at the table of diversity. And our work to hold candidates accountable for their commitments to Israel and to us. 2,000 years ago, our sage Rabbi Tarfon taught, "The day is short and there is much work to be done." Indeed, that has ever been true. It is true today. There is much work to be done to ensure that Israel is supported, to safeguard our own community, and to preserve the democracy that has enabled Jews and Jewish life to flourish here in America. And then Rabbi Tarfon continues, "But the reward is great, and the Holy One is counting on us." We are not required to complete the work of our time, but neither are we permitted to absent ourselves from it. Indeed, the reward is great, and surely the Holy One is counting on us. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.